Theodor Seuss Geisel, better known as Dr. Seuss, once wrote, "Unless someone like you cares a whole awful lot, nothing is going to get any better." It's not. These words are the epitome of the story of Hyacinthia, a kingdom that chose to turn away from simple solutions to complex problems and eventually got wiped off the face of the earth. In this video, you will learn about a powerful kingdom whose king banned bathing. You'll find out what motivated him to do this and how it destroyed his kingdom. Do you think such a thing could happen today? Have you ever been to Greece? If you have, you'd probably know the place called Patras. It is a port city famous for its connection to the mythical hero Perseus and his slaying of the sea monster Cetus. However, few know that near Patras there is an archaeological site named Helike, home to the ruins of a civilization forgotten by time, the Kingdom of Hyacinthia. Many historians believe that the legendary Kingdom of Hyacinthia, mentioned in Homer's Iliad, may have actually existed and thrived around 700 BC. Its capital, Helike, was strategically located on the Peloponnese Peninsula. The city's main advantage was the natural harbor, which contributed significantly to its growth and prosperity. According to legends, the kingdom was ruled by a king named Lycaon. He was considered a cruel and merciless ruler. One day, while organizing a hunt, he encountered Hermes, disguised as a human. King Lycaon offered the god hospitality, but later decided to sacrifice Hermes to appease his gods. As punishment, Hermes turned the king into a wolf, an event that gave the Hyacinthus their name. As centuries passed, the kingdom rebuilt itself and rose again, giving birth to many talented architects, sculptors, and philosophers. The kingdom reached its peak during the reign of King Theodosius. He was a philosopher king. He delighted in luxury and aesthetic beauty. He surrounded himself with sculptures of exquisite beauty. His court was a hub for poets and artists from across the region. King Theodosius was well respected throughout the known world, and trade along the coast of Hyacinthia was particularly prosperous. However, one day, the king came down with a fever, and despite the efforts of healers, his condition worsened. Theodosius, desperate to save himself, made a pact with the gods, promising that if he survived, he would dedicate his life to the service of the gods. The king recovered, but his encounter with death caused him to rethink many aspects of his life. He began studying the teachings of the Delphic oracle, analyzing old religious texts, and talking with monks. Theodosius was already an incredibly wealthy man, and after dedicating himself to the pursuit of spiritual enlightenment, he amassed even greater wealth. He cut expenses and spent enormous sums of money buying rare books and artifacts from distant lands. One evening, after a heavy rain, the king noticed that the smell of fresh earth was mixed with something else, something he couldn't quite put his finger on. That night, he couldn't sleep, tossing and turning in his bed, thinking about the smell he smelled earlier that day. What is this magical power of water? He asked himself, gazing at the raindrops running down the window pane. He began to observe the people around him. He saw them roll up their sleeves to reveal dirt under their fingernails, eat without washing their hands, and walk barefoot through the muddy streets. Theodosius concluded that people's lives were full of filth, and he was deeply troubled by this. The king summoned the most influential people in the kingdom and announced his decision to ban bathing in Hyacinthia. All kinds of bathing, public and private, were prohibited, including washing fruits and vegetables. His advisors tried to dissuade the king from this idea, explaining its potential negative consequences, but Theodosius was adamant. The king knew that his decree would cause unrest among the people. He expected anger, revolts, and riots. But what he did not expect was indifference. The citizens of Hyacinthia accepted the king's order without much ado, although many doubted its wisdom. When the sun-drenched days of summer arrived, the people of Hyacinthia suffered. Body odor filled the streets. Dirt stuck to people's bodies due to the heat, and flies buzzed around them. Soon skin diseases began to appear, and people's faces, arms, and legs were covered in sores. Some claimed these afflictions were God's punishment for their sinful past. Others said the illnesses were sent by the jealous gods to test their faith in the new teachings of the king. When children started dying from these diseases, parents began to protest. But Theodosius was unmoved. He ordered everyone to continue adhering to the law, claiming it was necessary to cleanse themselves not only physically, but also spiritually. He even built temples dedicated to the faith of natural purity. As time went on, the protests grew louder. The followers of the faith of natural purity called the protesters infidels and accused them of conspiring against the king. Meanwhile, King Theodosius, ignoring the suffering of his people, continued to expand his collection of ancient books and artifacts. He organized feasts, inviting 8 guests every day, pretending everything was fine. Every morning, Theodosius woke up feeling unwell, although his food was meticulously prepared and he never ate anything questionable. He frequently experienced nausea and indigestion. The king began to suspect that his stomach problems were related to the faith of natural purity. But he didn't want to admit that his own decree was to blame. A few years passed, and the situation in Hyacinthia got worse. The people who had initially accepted the king's decree with bewilderment now hated it. Many abandoned the city, seeking refuge elsewhere. Those who stayed behind lived in constant misery, enduring hunger, thirst, and disease. The streets of the once magnificent Hyacinthia were filthy, littered with dead animals and rotting fruit. Shops were shuttered and trade ceased. No one wanted to buy goods brought in by merchants who reeked of stale sweat and decay. Unbeknownst to Theodosius, the neighboring states were keeping a close eye on Hyacinthia. When the neighboring kings saw the once mighty and wealthy Hyacinthia turn into a desolate wasteland, they felt no pity or sympathy. Instead, they saw an opportunity to expand their own territories. Soon, a coalition of neighboring kingdoms assembled an army and marched on Hyacinthia. By that time, the residents of Hyacinthia had lost their will to resist. King Theodosius, pale and emaciated, watched from the palace walls as the enemy approached. There was no need for a battle. The army of Hyacinthia, weakened by disease and exhaustion, could not offer any resistance. Thus, the kingdom of Hyacinthia ceased to exist. Those who survived the war were plagued by incurable diseases. And those who remained healthy died of starvation because no one bothered to plant crops anymore. Not a single historian knows exactly when this tragic event took place. It could have been 700 BC, or perhaps 600 BC, however. This story has come down to us, leaving us with valuable lessons. Today, we tend to associate uncleanliness with certain cultures and religions. We might think those who don't bathe often are dirty and uncivilized. But the truth is, until the mid-19th century, hygiene was not as common a practice as we think. Public baths were not available to everyone, and hand-washing was seen as a waste of time. Doctors believed germs were beneficial for humans and wouldn't cause harm. Only in the mid-1800s did we discover the importance of washing hands before eating and after using the toilet. And you know what's interesting? Today, there are still communities that reject modern hygiene practices. For example, the Sori and Morsi tribes in Ethiopia live without bathing. They cover their bodies with layers of butter and fat and only occasionally wash themselves in rivers. On the other hand, the Himba tribe in Namibia believes that bathing daily leads to illness. They use special oils and powders to keep their bodies clean. These tribes are just a small number of exceptions in our modern world. And yet the story of Hyacinthia serves as a cautionary tale for all of us. Have you ever been to the Egyptian Museum in Cairo? Among the countless exhibits, you'll find an ancient sculpture of a man holding his nose. It's an ordinary, everyday thing we do every day. But back then, it was truly special. Having a stuffy nose was considered a sign of ill health, so people used to pinch their noses to make it easier to breathe. In those days, they believed that closing your nose could protect you from evil spirits trying to enter your body through the nose. Later, people invented special clay noses to solve this problem. These findings from the distant past remind us that we should always be critical and not blindly follow beliefs handed down by previous generations. Unfortunately, the story of Hyacinthia shows that even intelligent people can make terrible mistakes. King Theodosius was an enlightened ruler, but his idea of banning bathing led to the destruction of his kingdom. The history of mankind is filled with similar examples. Scientists like Galileo and Nicholas Copernicus were persecuted for their discoveries that contradicted religious teachings. The list goes on. But let's think about the present. How often do we refuse to accept obvious truths? How many times have you encountered someone who stubbornly clings to outdated ideas and refuses to acknowledge undeniable facts? Such people remind me of the citizens of Hyacinthia, unable to free themselves from the chains of their habits and beliefs. I hope the story of Hyacinthia helps us all understand that sometimes we need to question even our most cherished beliefs and traditions. Progress is inevitable and sometimes even unstoppable. And those who try to stop it will ultimately be swept away by the tide of time. Thank you for watching this video. Give it a like and subscribe if you haven't already. See you soon. Bye.